So I don't know. It's good morning, good afternoon, good evening. So from my side, good evening to everybody.
Right from Malawi, it's about 3 minutes to 2 o'clock in Malawi. So it's good afternoon to each and every one of you. Thank you.
And greetings to Australia.
What is the time in Australia now?
Good night, Paul.
We'll be the first to see Tuesday. First to see Tuesday.
What about if Fiji's on, Paul? Won't Fiji see Tuesday before you?
Yes, they will. Yes, you've got us there on a technicality. You've got us.
Yeah. Greetings.
That'd be Michael Sly, was it?
Yeah, that was Michael.
Michael, yes.
How you doing?
Not too bad. How you guys going over there? You got all the big leaders of the world over there?
Yes, we also had Coco the Clown performing on the beach with them. I can't tell you how embarrassing it is to be a Brit at the moment.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the Australian Prime Minister for a moment there.
Although most of our country love our Prime Minister, but the rest of us look at him and go, "Really? Is this for real?"
Right. I'm sure he's listening in tonight.
I thought you were picking on the U.S. again, Michael.
Well, I think we've picked up your mantle, yes. And Mr. Biden had a very nice time with the Queen, so.
Yeah, you're right. Eduardo, how are you, Eduardo?
Fine, very well. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
Just
Eduardo.
got a rain last week. It's a marvelous rain.
Very fortunate.
About that.
Very fortunate. Well, let's hope it will continue.
I hope so.
So you got to admit them all then.
Hey, James.
Good to see you all.
So we are already 30. I suggest that we still wait maybe 5 more minutes to let time to other people to come.
How are you, David?
Hello, Timothy.
Helmut, guten Tag. Fred, Tag. Johan, hello.
Hello.
Paul Chambry, you look good day. You look great.
Thank you.
You look as though you only just got up.
It must be the aging process that's making me look young.
Well, that at least that's something for me to look forward to.
Right. I can tell you it's pretty late at night.
Hello. Warren, good day. In a long time no see.
Hello, everyone.
Hello, Lindsay.
Hello.
How are we all?
Bom dia, good morning, how everybody?
Is that Brazil?
Sounds hello, Christina. Good morning.
Hello,
Good
Hello,
morning.
Christina.
Morning, Christina.
Very pleased to see all of you here.
Thank you very much, Christina.
Hello, Christina, from down under.
Hello, hello. At least we have internet and we're able to talk to each other and continue our meetings differently
So
than
true.
being in Australia.
So true. Yes, we were looking forward to hosting you, but it wasn't to be. But there's always another time.
Yes. I always remember 2007 when Australia hosted the meeting and it was beautiful. It was very,
Yes.
very nice.
I remember it very well. I was there as well. I remember going to Brazil in 2005 as well.
Yeah.
Good morning, Carlos.
Good morning to everyone. Good morning, Paul. Good evening, Paul.
Good evening.
Yeah.
So we are now 51. I suggest we still wait for 2 more minutes before to begin.
Timothy, are you recording this again?
Yes, it will be recorded. I was typing that this session will be recorded once again.
Okay. Thank you.
Jean-Pierre.
So it's 5 minutes that we should have begun. So I suggest that maybe we can begin if you agree. Once again, this meeting will be recorded so that I can send a link when it will be finished. Once again, I will suggest that if you don't speak, please cut your mic. Otherwise, I will have to do it for you. I'm sorry for that, but it's easier for everyone. The point is that there is no translation here. So keep in mind that most of us don't have a degree in English. So please speak very slowly using basic English so that everyone can understand you. If you want to ask some questions during the meeting, you can use the chat box that is on your right side, and we will summarize all the questions. And at the end, there will be a time for question and answer. That's all for me. Now I will give the floor to Ken Growers. So Ken Growers, they are the association of Ken Growers in Australia. Thank you very much to host this meeting, and I give you the floor.
Well, thank you, Timothy. Ladies and gentlemen, as chairman of the Australian Cane Growers Council, can I welcome you one and all to this virtual session about the Australian sugar industry. Just to introduce myself, most people would know me. My name is Paul Skembry. I'm a cane farmer from the region of Mackay, which is a very substantial part of the Australian sugar industry. And I'm also chairman of the Australian Cane Growers Council, and we're delighted to be able to host this session tonight, where hopefully we can give you some insight into the Australian sugar industry. This technology tonight is remarkable, and as Maria Christina says, that whilst we're not meeting in person at a single venue, however, through this technology we are joining together 27 countries, and as I understand it, 27 organisations are also engaging in this conversation. So we hope to give you some insight into the Australian sugar industry tonight. Can I say that we are very disappointed that we couldn't host the World Association of Beet and Cane Growers Conference in Australia. We were very much looking forward to it. I know many of you were looking forward to coming to Australia. We were hoping to go to Cairns, which is a wonderful region of Australia, and I know Jose Arrivier has been to Cairns, and possibly when he retires he could buy a cane farm in Cairns. But we were very disappointed that we couldn't host the conference, obviously because of the pandemic. We wanted to show you and showcase to you our industry. We wanted to show you a little about our country, and we wanted to also offer you the great hospitality of the Australian people, but it wasn't to be. So tonight is the next best thing, and tonight is a virtual session into the Australian sugar industry. So look, let's get into it, and just the structure of tonight will be fairly straightforward. We have three presentations tonight. Firstly, one by myself as chairman of the Australian Cane Growers Council. I want to give you a sense of where we're at as an industry, something about the character and the traits of our industry. And secondly, Dan Galligan, the CEO of Queensland Cane Growers. Many of you would know Dan. Dan's going to give you a presentation about the structure of cane growers and how we go about the business of advocating on behalf of our growers and on behalf of our industry. Because one of the great things that binds us together in WABCG or ISO or whatever it might be is the fact that through these experiences there are learnings that we can apply to our industry. So we hope to share some insight about how we perform advocacy. And finally, on my left tonight, I have Owen Menkins. Owen is the Junior Vice Chairman of Cane Growers. He is from the Burdekin region. The Burdekin region is our largest cane growing region. And Owen is someone who owns and operates a family farm in the Burdekin region, which is very typical of the Australian sugar industry. And Owen's going to give you an insight as to what it's like to be a progressive Australian cane farmer, talking about how he manages his farm, give you some sense of the technologies that he uses, and also the tools such as forward pricing for sugar. And I'm sure you'll enjoy Owen's presentation. But to break it up tonight, we have some visual presentations, some visual delights, some sight and sounds of the Australian sugar industry and I'm sure you'll enjoy what you see on your screens as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you will enjoy. And so to start out, can we start off with a very small visual presentation about the Australian sugar industry?
We can't hear you, I think, Paul. Maybe you cut your mic.
You got no audio there, Timothy?
I think we can't hear anything.
Okay, just
Is
let
it-
me check something.
All right.
Yeah, it's working at our end. Hang on.
That's it. That's it. It will come, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe if all of us cut the camera, maybe it will use less internet, and maybe we should be able to use the movie. I suggest that we cut our camera so that you can launch the movie. I fear the movie will be too high. Maybe we can send the movie after the meeting to people, and maybe we can begin by the PowerPoint, if I may. I fear the movie is too heavy.
Yeah, Timothy, I'm just rejoining.
Yes, try again.
And we'll try and get the presentation up and we'll circulate to Levy.
Okay. And just to let you know, the movie is working very well, but just there is no sound. But it's no problem because it's Roten behind.
Well, the Great Barrier Reef is a national and international icon, and we take our environmental responsibility very seriously. We farm 400,000 hectares adjoining the Great Barrier Reef. Some people have described this as probably one of the most challenging environmental gigs on planet Earth. But we're up for it.
Not only are these rows straight to a 2 centimetre accuracy, they're repeatable across this whole field. That allows you in 5 years' time, when this crop cycle is ended, to come in and know that that this is the area that's growing the crop, and this is the area that's the trucker's owned.
This is a creek that runs through the middle of our property, and my kids and when I was small, used to come swimming down here all the time. So it's something that I don't want to pollute. So we're right at the top of the glass farm, top of the hill, so we don't want to cause that. Fertiliser and all the inputs are very expensive. We don't want to waste their money, so we want to use them to the best that we can. So we just, like I said, like every farmer and whole industry, we want to protect the land, and that's what our main aim is.
We've got a powerful vested interest
to make sure that we're farming this land sustainably. One of my colleagues always says to me, the great thing about the sugar industry now is that the environmental driver and the economic driver line up. The two coincide. Best practice environmentally means optimum economic outcome for a farmer.
Okay. Should be a book.
Right. Okay, well, we apologise for those technical difficulties, but now if I can speak to my presentation. My presentation is an overview of the Australian sugar industry. What are some of the characteristics? What are some of the traits of the Australian sugar industry? And I've titled this presentation as Change, Adaptation and Meeting the Challenges, because if there's been one constant theme in our industry over 150 years, it has been the fact that we have changed. There has been constant evolution as an industry. In fact, our industry is one of the oldest industries in Australia. In fact, we've been around for 150 years. Apparently, when the first fleet left England and arrived in Australia in 1788, on board was some sugarcane. So we are one of Australia's oldest and maturest industries. When I was first elected to cane growers in 1983, it's a long time ago, certainly the industry of 1983 bears no resemblance to the industry in Australia in 2021. So can I just start out on a humorous note, as I always do? Australia is a big country, and certainly digital connectivity is very important to us. Certainly it's a huge country, and most Australian families apparently have about 9 or 10 devices hooked up to every household, and even our most well-known animal, the kangaroo, the native animal, they even need an iPad with Google Maps so that you won't get lost in Australia. It's such a big country. Firstly, just an overview of the Australian sugar industry. We have 4,500 sugarcane farms. 95% of the cane is grown in the state of Queensland and 5% is grown in New South Wales. The principal, I guess, economic unit in the cane growing sector is the family-owned farm, and that's always been the mainstay of the cane that is grown in Australia. And so it's not uncommon to have farms that have been in the same ownership of a single family for multiple generations. So the family-owned farm is very important to our industry. There are about 370,000 hectares under cane in Australia, and obviously we farm on the eastern seaboard of Australia. 22 sugar mills in Australia, and in the main, most of them are foreign owned, and some of the owners of the mills are obviously companies that are familiar to you, not least being Wilmar. Certainly we've got the Thai company Mitpol. Nordsucker 2 years ago invested in a company that I'm a shareholder in, Mackay Sugar, and they now have a 70% stake in Mackay Sugar. And we have COFCO as well, which is an extension of the Chinese government. It owns Tully Mill, which is the largest single train mill in Australia. I want to make this point that whilst the mills are principally owned by foreign companies and overseas companies, certainly 8 of the mills are partly owned by farmers. We produce on average terms in recent years around 30 million tonnes of cane, which we convert to around 4.2 million tonnes of sugar. We grow cane on the eastern seaboard of Australia. Certainly, we have a map on your screen, or at least I hope there is a map up on your screen. And just to give you an overview, we spread over 2,000 kilometres of coastline. And certainly, obviously, we farm on the coastal plain because it is the most fertile soil in Australia. 4/5 of Australia is unfortunately desert, and so that's why we tend to farm principally on the coastal plain. Obviously, in the coastal plain, there is a greater propensity for rainfall, and the climate is typically tropical or subtropical, which is conducive to growing cane. Some more aspects about the Australian sugar industry. We are the second largest exporter of raw sugar in the world, exporting around 3.6 million tonnes of sugar. 85% of our sugar production is exported, and so we are principally an export-orientated industry. And so that's why we in Australia are very much focused on issues such as trade and market access and fair rules in terms of international trade, because we need to cut the mustard in terms of the international marketplace. And so for our industry, it's all about the global price. In fact, 98% of our production bears a price risk exposure to the global price. We produce around $2.5 billion worth of sugar each year, and that creates around $4 to $6 billion of economic activity in Queensland and New South Wales. So we are an important industry, and we're responsible for the jobs of around 40,000 Australians. The next map simply shows you some of the export destinations of the Australian sugar industry. Not surprisingly, you can see from that map, most of our sugar goes into the Asia-Pacific region, and we sell into the Asia-Pacific region for two reasons. One is that obviously we're in close proximity to the Asia-Pacific region, so we've got a freight advantage over our competitors. And secondly, by selling into the Asia-Pacific region, we obviously attract what's known as the Far Eastern Premium, which is an acknowledgement that there is a statistical deficit of production to consumption in the Asia-Pacific region. Our biggest customers are Japan, South Korea and Indonesia. So next two graphs, there's a fair bit involved in those two graphs. On the left-hand side is a representation on the thin black line of sugar content. Sugar content is important to us in Australia because effectively we are paid on sugar content. We have a formula which I won't describe, but I think Owen is going to try and attempt to describe it to you. But it basically allocates the share between growers and millers. So the black line just shows in the last 10 years how there's been a movement in average sugar content. Quite interestingly, if you look at the last 10 years, 2016 has been the most substantial production year, but had the lowest sugar content. I believe that was a wet year, and so we were harvesting a lot of cane. There was a lot of moisture inside the cane, and so the CCS level was depressed. Importantly, if you look at the green bars, it's a story about our production in the last 10 years. We've been remarkably resilient in terms of production. The high point has been 2016. There has been a fall away in recent years, but can I suggest that we've been through a very bleak period, particularly in terms of low international prices, particularly prices that have been at or below the costs of production. And certainly we've had adverse weather. There's been a major drought in Australia, particularly in the southern regions of Queensland on the coastline. So overall, our production, we'd like to think, is still quite resilient. On the right-hand side, if you have a look at the graph, it tracks on the black line what is the average production of an individual farm. We think that average production per farm is around 8,500 to 9,000 tonnes, and the average farm is about 100 to 120 hectares. If you look at those green bars, not surprisingly, the number of farmers is in decline. That shouldn't be construed necessarily as a representation that people are leaving the industry. Yes, there have been some growers that have left the industry, but the reality is that certainly in our economy, costs are high, particularly such as fuel, labour, transport, energy, and so we need to increase economies of scale. So not surprisingly, as you very much increase the average farm size, the number of farmers obviously subsides. One of the key attributes of our industry has been a very strong focus on research and development. Matter of fact, we describe this as an X factor in our industry. We realised in the very early days of our industry that we needed to be internationally competitive. We needed to invest very strongly in innovation and research and development and technology. We're not subsidised, and so very early on, when the industry was at its formative stages, there was a very strong focus on research and development to make it universal in terms of everybody had to buy into it, and also too that ensured that there was equity in terms of the distribution and access to our R&D. We currently have a single R&D organisation, that's Sugar Research Australia. It manages farm systems, pests and diseases, agronomy, entomology, biosecurity, but most importantly, our biggest outlay, nearly 70% of our outlay in R&D is towards cane plant breeding. Obviously, it all needs to start at the cane field. We need to produce more sugar per hectare, and that's why there's a strong focus on certainly the plant breeding program. We have an arrangement in Australia that if industries are able to pool collectively funds together, the federal government will match that in terms of a subsidy towards the industry and support research and development. As I indicated, we're not subsidised as a country in terms of direct payments, so we do spend a lot of money as an industry on research and development. So if the industry puts together, say, 25 million, we pay a levy. The growers pay 35 cents, the mills pay 35 cents a tonne. Everybody has to contribute, and then the Commonwealth Government matches that funding on a dollar for dollar basis. So roughly we've got around $50 million that we dedicate towards R&D each year. We have a system in Australia that's fairly universal, so there is infrastructure in the industry right through the 2,500 kilometres of coastline. So you will see Sugar Research Office infrastructure all throughout our industry. Our industry in a historical context, as you know, has been very much engaged in innovation, and so we very much played a leading role in the development of mechanical cane harvesting, bulk sugar handling and automation of sugar mills. The next slide, there's a fair bit on it, and I'll try and keep it fairly brief, but if I were to look at Australia in a contemporary sense as it relates to our industry, possibly in the last 35 to 40 years, the most significant driver for change in Australia has been deregulation. Around the 1980s, early 1990s, the Australian government, rightly or wrongly, believed that they wanted to set Australia up for globalisation. They wanted to set Australia up for trade liberalisation, so there was a stronger focus around getting rid of statutory underpinnings of the industry to a more commercially focused industry. And I say rightly or wrongly, but that was the view of the government, that deregulation would lead to greater investment either within Australia or from external sources, and also create greater innovation and competition within the industry. So without going through those individual dates per se, some of them are fairly important. You can start out right on the left. In 1989, we had an embargo that was removed, that was replaced by a tariff. The tariff was removed in 1996. The tariff applied to the import of sugar. And you get to around 2006 where the industry was deregulated. The statutory production controls were removed and we went to a more commercially focused system where contracts were entered into on a commercial basis between growers and millers. In 2006, which was a very significant milestone in our industry, the statutory single desk marketing arrangement was removed, and in its place, the industry adopted a voluntary arrangement. That arrangement worked well till 2013, till a number of milling companies decided to go on their own way. I'm not suggesting that there was anything untoward about that. Deregulation did provide an opportunity for people to effectively do their own thing. However, as is the consequence sometimes with deregulation, it probably brought forth some unintended consequences to our way of thinking. It unleashed monopoly behaviour. Some sugar milling companies, not all, and I want to stress that very strongly, not all, sought to exploit their regional monopoly status. Basically, what that means is I farm north of Kai. I have a dispute with Nordsucker, who has 70% of the equity in Mackay Sugar. I can't put my cane in a truck and transport it 120 miles up the road to a Wilmar mill because it would not be feasible in a cost sense. So on that basis, we believe that the benefits of deregulation, which was to bring about greater competition, were not being realised. And effectively in 2017, the national government introduced a code of conduct. The code of conduct is still in place now, and effectively what it did was to allow growers to have a choice in terms of marketing and to create the freedoms that deregulation was meant to create. But also what it did was to restore some balance in the bargaining power between farmers and millers. Very recently, the Commonwealth Government has agreed that the code is a net benefit to the industry and the economy and has signed off on it. So that's the framework by which the industry has been operating in the last 25 to 30 years. Certainly, we have a major issue in terms of social licence. I suspect all of you in your own respective countries are dealing with the same challenges in relation to social licence, and in our circumstance, Australians have ascribed a very high value to environmental values, particularly in terms of industries being environmentally sustainable and particularly in terms of the environmental value around the Great Barrier Reef. So we farm right beside the Great Barrier Reef. So we farm 400,000 hectares beside the Great Barrier Reef. We are very proud of our environmental credentials. We think that they're first class, and certainly our farming systems have evolved to produce an industry, or at least our farming systems are very much environmentally sustainable. But because Australians have a high expectation of environmental sustainability, and I want to stress we need to meet those expectations, the Queensland Government introduced a Reef Protection Act in 2019. In our view, we think that that act is onerous, it's highly bureaucratic, it's very prescriptive in terms of the permissible application rates of fertiliser and chemicals. It has a very onerous record-keeping regime, which is proving to be quite difficult. We at Cane Growers have been pushing back against the pendulum. We think the pendulum has gone too far towards excessive bureaucracy, and we've been pushing back to get something that is a more sensible and pragmatic framework for us to operate in. But I suspect that most of you in your own countries are certainly dealing with the issue of social licence. In terms of the social licence issue, one of the strategies that we developed was you can wait for the regulation or you can be proactive. The industry decided to move towards a Smart Cane BMP program. Smart Cane BMP is developed from within the industry. The basis of it is to show that our growers have the skill set and have the environmental level of competence to certainly meet the government's standards. And so we wanted to demonstrate to the community and to the government that we had the capacity from within the industry to meet the expectations of the community. So we have a program called Smart Cane BMP. There are 6 modules and 3 of the modules are compulsory. Now, basically what it entails, I'm accredited under BMP. I'm up for re-accreditation very shortly. There is an independent auditor that comes to the farm. The auditor is at arm's length from the industry, and the auditor has to certify that I'm meeting the standards of best practice and meeting the standards of the government. We think that this is going to be important to sell our sugar in the future because increasingly our customers now are seeking greater certainty from us, greater certification that our sugar is being produced in an environmentally sustainable way. So currently we are pleased that 35% of the area is fully accredited. Yes, that figure needs to be higher, but there is some rigour attached to it, and certainly it is increasing at quite a rapid rate. It's our ambition to obviously get that up to perhaps 70 to 80% in the next 4 to 5 years. The next issue is one that all of you are familiar with, and that's the debate about sugar in the diet. And I'm probably not telling you anything that you don't know. It is a debate that has raged around the world, and certainly we in Australia have experienced it recently. I only watched the news tonight and witnessed that one of the Australian state governments has decided to ban soft drinks at some of its public facilities. So it certainly has been a very prominent debate in Australia. The allegation is that sugar is a leading contributor to diabetes, heart disease and obesity. And we have been successful in Australia in convincing the Australian government not to introduce a sugar tax. It's taken a lot of work, a lot of passion to fight off a sugar tax. And our argument has been simply that to introduce a sugar tax would be a simplistic approach to a complex problem. We need a holistic approach to take on these contemporary ailments, whether they be obesity or diabetes, that we need a more holistic approach. So to date, whilst we have the current party in government, they have given a commitment that there will be no sugar tax. So my last slide is the future. What of the future of our industry? We've been around for 150 years. We are at a point where we're having a critical reassessment of where we're at. Some of the challenges we're facing is that we are losing area under cane. There is competitive pressure for our cane lands, certainly from other crops, tree crops, and particularly from grazing. Beef prices in Australia are the highest that they've been in the history of the beef industry, so our land is under pressure. As well, as I've described, increasing reef regulation is for many farmers a psychological barrier, that they feel they can't make that bureaucratic threshold, and that is a real challenge to us in that it's actually a disincentive for farmers to want to continue to grow cane. We don't see at this point in time that there's been certainly an exodus from the industry because of it, but certainly it is a real threat, and that's why proactiveness in the environmental area is important to us. So they're major challenges. But we are not bereft of opportunity. We've been around for 150 years. The industry leadership recently has come together. We're having an important leadership meeting tomorrow talking about our future. We see our future as being one where we can generate other income streams. We've got a huge reliance on the global price. 98% of our production bears a price risk exposure to the global price. We've taken the view that we need to find other income streams to make us more resilient. Government too sees the industry as a natural home because of the biomass that we produce for biofuels such as ethanol, bioenergy, particularly cogeneration, renewable energy, bioplastics. Certainly that is the type of conversation that we are now having within the industry and certainly with the state and national government. So, Timothy, I might stop there. That's an overview of our industry, probably a little bit longer than I would have hoped for. But to manage this session, I'll hand back to you because there may well be some questions, and then we'll take it from there.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. There were a first question by Jacqueline Sauzier from Mauritius. She was asking if there is some imports of sugar in Australia, but I think Warren Males and Dan already replied in the chat box, replying that there were only very, very small amounts because your market is open. There is no tariff to enter Australia concerning sugar. Another question has been asked by Elisabeth Lacoste from CB in Europe. She asked if when you have an accreditation BMP, when you are a growers BMP smart cane, then do you have an extra amount of money, or what is the effect for you apart from maybe lower costs due to optimized management?
The incentive for a grower to be BMP accredited is that the state government recognises that an accredited grower has reached their regulatory standard, and so there is no financial payments to a grower for BMP, but the government has agreed that those farmers who are accredited will not be audited by the Queensland government. So there is no scrutiny by the Queensland government to those growers. But I guess I made the point that at some stage we think the BMP will transition to selling clean, green produced sugar, for want of better words, and that ultimately there could be a premium to flow back to the industry. In Australia, there's a cotton industry where those growers who are BMP accredited, they receive a premium over and above farmers who do not receive, who are not accredited.
Okay, thank you very much. And another question from Mauritius. As a grower, you are paid only on sugar, on the sugar value. Are you also paid on the molasses value, for instance? And this brings to a new question. Up to now, you did not develop so much the ethanol outlet. At the very end of your speech, you said that it will be maybe a subject in the future. Can you give us a little more detail concerning these projects concerning ethanol?
So as a general rule, to answer the first part of the question, the farmers don't receive money for the byproducts of sugar milling, such as molasses and electricity. I know in some parts of the industry there are very small payments that are made in recognition of, say, molasses, but generally, as a rule, the growers do not receive payment for those products that are produced in the milling process. But it begs the question that if we're going to talk about an industry going forward in terms of ethanol, in terms of bioenergy, bioplastics, etc., we will have to sit down and talk to the mills about how we share that income. I'm a Mackay sugar grower. We did have a cane payment system where we did share in molasses, we did share in electricity. It was a greater alignment of the drivers in the industry. And certainly we as an industry are going to have to sit down and talk about it. In relation to ethanol, for a whole range of reasons, which I probably won't go into, the ethanol industry has never developed as much as it might have developed in other countries. From time to time, governments have introduced mandates at a state or a national level, but it seemed to me that the mandates were too small and there didn't seem to be any enforcement around the mandates. Now, I'm not an expert on ethanol. Perhaps some of the other Australians might like to explain, but certainly there hasn't been that drive from the government to put in place a policy to drive necessarily an ethanol industry. There's been some attempts made, but we're thinking we're at a stage now where there might be some maturity in government policy where it might happen.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there is just Frighton and Jolomole from Malawi. Frighton, you raise your hand. Maybe you have a direct question to ask. Or
Yes. First of all, let me greet you all. I've already done, but let me repeat. Very interested, very much interested with the presentation of our colleagues from Australia. But I've got one question, concerning the voluntary single desk for sugar marketing. How did it actually start? And what made the millers to move away so that they can actually start finding their own markets? That's the first one. The second one was exactly what you have just alluded to. You talked about the molasses in some, provinces not being paid to farmers and the electricity. I believe this should actually be looked into very carefully, because that's what brings in, problems like people not trusting their millers. Because we need definitely to have a trust between the millers and the growers. Can I stop there?
So to answer your question and to try and keep this within a minute, if I could, there's been a long history around the marketing arrangements. Effectively, my guess is for 80, 90 years, we had statutory single desk marketing. That's not uncommon, and a lot of countries would have possibly had statutory single desk marketing. We bought or we pooled all the sugar together and sold it through one point. Personally, I thought that was a better system. It was far more cost effective, and by selling at a single point, you could capture all the premiums that were available in the marketplace. As I indicated, the Australian government, rightly or wrongly, took the view that we needed to open Australia up to greater investment channels and certainly towards globalisation and trade liberalisation. One of the pressures that Australia was under in terms of trade liberalisation was that it was seen that the single desk was something that was bestowing some advantage to Australia and hence was not conducive towards trade liberalisation. They were the arguments. I'm not suggesting that I necessarily agree with it. So we did operate then after the statutory single desk was removed in a voluntary arrangement. To answer the question, why did people break away? We still wonder why, but I think the answer is some of those companies were large companies in their own right and felt that they had the expertise, they had the economy of scale to do it themselves. And your last comment about molasses and the byproducts, you're absolutely right. I think we can find cane payment systems that create greater trust between growers and processors. We're going to need that because we have a symbiotic relationship in that the mill needs the farmer and the farmer needs the mill. And certainly by sharing in those byproducts, I do agree with you that it creates greater trust. So certainly that's the type of industry that we're headed towards, and that's why we've got a major meeting tomorrow to talk about those things.
Well, thank you. Just a last question before giving the mic to Dan. A question from Arvind Shudasama. He's from the International Sugar Journal, and he asks, since you have no import tariffs, what is stopping some top producers' country dumping sugar in your own market?
A great question. I think the answer is there is nothing to stop that happening. So the technical answer is nothing at all, except that we've got a natural tariff barrier, which is called distance. Because Australia is very much well removed from a number of other sugar producing countries. I know that Thailand is not too far away from Australia, but there is a natural barrier in terms of other countries wanting to dump sugar into Australia. In other words, to put sugar in a ship and say transporting it 14,000 kilometres across, say, the Pacific Ocean to dump it into Australia doesn't seem to make much sense. So certainly there has been some sugar imported into Australia, but it is the natural geographic barrier that acts as almost a tariff barrier.
Thank you very much, Paul. No more questions from the chat box.
Next. Yeah.
So, Timothy, again, we've got another visual presentation. And so, Dan, press the play button.
Thanks for joining our virtual bus tour to the wet tropics, where Cane Growers is helping growers move to precision agriculture by installing GPS base stations. GPS guides farm machinery on set tracks, minimising soil disturbance and targeting inputs. GPS also means a drone can now help identify and target.
No more sound, Dan. Dan, I think there is no sound more.
This drone can carry 10 litres of herbicide.
This machine is reasonably smart. It's able to go out and with a series of radars be able to lock onto the top of the crop, and then it can negotiate its way to where we've actually identified a patch of vine, and then it can spray that targeted vine, but only that area. So instead of having to spray a much larger area across the block, we can actually target just, in some cases, just a few square metres to take that vine out.
Another use of technology is taking the guesswork out of irrigation and other farm decisions. We're in the Mackay region now, where a project initiated by cane growers is feeding information from moisture probes via the 4G network and solar power into a shared website. Growers connected to the network, like Steve Muscat, can keep a close eye on crop water use in real time.
Prior to the use of GDOTs and moisture probes, we were sort of, I would say, guessing when we were going to do irrigation. That may be from a drive around, oh, gee, you know, I think it's dry, we need the water. Otherwise, it was a scheduled program, like, you know, making sure our nutrition and herbicides are irrigated in to stop movement. So now it's taking the guesswork out of it. We probably thought we were irrigating right before, but now we know.
Okay, and now Dan Gilligan is going to talk about the Cane Growers Organisation and how we advocate on behalf of our growers. Dan.
Thank you, Chairman Paul, and thank you everyone for your patience. It's obviously takes a fair bit of bandwidth to get audio around the world, but we will share these videos with you at a later time. My presentation this evening is to just share with you, perhaps for some, the not so interesting parts around the organisation and how we try and do our work here at Cane Growers before we step back with Owen to talk about farming operations in Australia. So I will just step through some basic structures of Cane Growers, how we work, what we work on, and how we establish our priorities for action in Australia. I hope some of these insights will be valuable for you. I think I certainly learnt a lot from Eduardo and his team when I travelled to Brazil to see how your associations there dealt with sometimes very different, but often very similar issues to our own here in Australia. As Paul has said, while we've had an industry in Australia for 150 years, Cane Growers has been around for just under 100 years. We'll be 100 in 2026, and we've been representing the interests of growers since that time. Our focus has always been around profitability, and I'm sure that's a common trend to every grower association across the world. When we talk to our farmers, the things that challenge their business are the things that they ask us to represent them on. As a company, we focus very much on our core values, Dominant in those values are two very important things. One, Paul has already mentioned our focus on social licence and our ability to engage with the community around which we grow sugarcane is very important. And positioned as we are in Australia along the Queensland coast, we have many regional communities that in some cases almost entirely rely on sugarcane as their dominant industry. As well as the community, being accountable to our membership is extremely important. We survive entirely off voluntary membership. Farmers choose to be a member of cane growers. They can choose to be members of other industry associations, or in some instances, farmers choose to not have a representative body at all. And I will touch on just some of the things we do for our members, but the most important thing, and perhaps the greatest challenge we have, is describing to our members all the things we are trying to do to represent their interests. So briefly touching on where we do our work. Essentially, this map is exactly the same as the map Paul showed in his presentation. We have representation in every major cane growing area in Queensland, Queensland being the state in Australia that produces nearly 95% of the sugarcane. We also do produce sugarcane in New South Wales, which is at the bottom of the map, which is north of Sydney, and all of that cane in New South Wales goes to domestic production of sugar. All of the icons you can see on our map, in those places we have a district office, we would call it. So we actually have a physical location, we have staff positioned in all of those regional towns. But interestingly, of those 13 local district offices, we have a huge variety of resources available. So our biggest office is here in Brisbane, which is, as we would say, our head office. We have around 22 staff. In our next largest office in Mackay, we have just under that, say 19 staff. But in that region, there is around 700 farmers. But our smallest office, in a location just south of here at Rocky Point, we have just one staff member who works just 1 or 2 days a week. So we have this huge variety of resources available. But importantly, it's been a very strong tradition for our membership to have a local presence, a local office, local staff, and somewhere where they can meet and talk about local issues. And it is that ability for us to represent those local issues that is still very important. Combined, we have what is a somewhat unique structure when we compare ourselves to other industry organisations in Australia. The unifying factor at cane growers is the grower. The grower chooses to be a member, and by choosing to be a member, they have that representation at that local district level, and a lot of the focus at that local level is the relationship with their local sugar mill. At that local level, we have district representation where growers work together to negotiate their cane supply agreement and organise relationships around harvesting and milling in supplying infrastructure from the mill and consistent supply to the mill during harvest time. At the state level, where we work here in Brisbane, we also lead the strategy and leadership elements of the industry. This is where we organise our policy and advocacy, and it's also where we lead the communication and legal support for the industry. So the growers have a very local presence, and then they have a state company presence as well. And combined, we hope they get the services that they require. When it comes to representing the interests of growers in Australia, we have both a very strong and a very high responsibility. Cane Growers has always had the privilege of having strong representation. We represent just under 71% of all the farmers in Queensland as a company. So that means the rest have chosen either alternative representation or no representation. This is a very, very strong representation when we consider other agricultural industries in Australia, but it remains very challenging to take that as a responsibility to, in many ways, not just represent growers, but also an opportunity to represent the interests of the entire Australian industry. I'll turn now to just how we do our work and the way we make our decisions. I mentioned that a member of Cane Growers has representation at the local level. So through our 13 local district companies, cane growers are able to elect to a policy council, a state council of farmers. So those 31 local companies nominate growers to represent their interests, and the council of farmers dictate the common interest issues and establish our policies. That council also elect a board of 8 farmers to govern the company, to set in place the corporate governance. They all work together to determine the best interests of farmers at their local level and to determine the strategies for the company. Importantly, what we hope is that we represent to the farmers that we are a company in the interests of farmers, led by farmers. So as you can see tonight with Paul, and many of you have seen for many years, we proudly want to put farmers at the centre of the face of cane growers. Farmers standing on the stage to talk about the issues of farming in Australia. That's at the core of what we try and achieve. We also work very much with other industry organisations. This chart shows you that while we have a very strong focus on sugar and sugar cane as a commodity in Australia, that is our singular focus as a company. We are also members of the Queensland Farmers Federation, which is a state federation of other industry organisations that represents irrigated agriculture, such as the cotton industry, but also piggeries and horticulture and chicken producers. So we work with them. At the national level, for all of agriculture in Australia, we are a member of the National Farmers Federation, where we work with other industry organisations across the country. And we work with them on issues of common interest. And finally, as you all know, we are members of the World Association of Beet and Cane Growers. For each of these different levels, we try and say to our farmers, we have the opportunity to amplify your voice, to take your very local issue around relationship with your mill, but also compare and work with everyone right through to the international sugar industry to share those insights, which is something that I know Paul and I have talked about a lot. The great value in working with other industry organisations and sharing the dilemmas that we all face is something that our members really appreciate and really value the insights that we get from you, our colleagues across the world, when we share these challenges. I'll now touch on some of the issues that we face. Essentially, we are trying to solve problems for farmers. So we establish policy on all the issues that you can see on your screen, and you can go to our website and you can see our position on each one of these issues. But they are designed to establish a position from the growers and farmers' perspective and how we can solve those challenges for them. Once we have a policy position, we also look to establish projects that might assist farmers to manage that issue, whether it be about water use efficiency or energy efficiency or environmental compliance like Smart Cane BNP. We also run projects for farmers to assist them, and I will explain some of those projects shortly. We do a lot of traditional advocacy. So this is just some photos of some recent work we've done, working with politicians, from our highest politicians in the land, our Prime Minister, right to local politicians, and doing local rallies and campaigns to try and work on issues, again, at that local level, right through to international issues, whether it be trade, particularly working with our federal national government, or local issues with our state government, where most of our environmental laws around management of the Great Barrier Reef or management of herbicides and pesticides are largely led by our state or provincial government. We have to have a close working relationship with all politicians, and sometimes that can be challenging. But we also do work with schools and with community fairs and shows to describe and work with the community to explain to them the value of sugarcane production. We also do a lot in communications. We have an Australian cane grower magazine that goes to around 4,000 people every month. We do a lot in traditional media, which is a photo of Paul on the front page of our local agricultural newspaper. And like all of you, I'm sure, we do a lot on social media through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And importantly, for tonight especially, we have our own YouTube channel. And the virtual bus tours we're trying to show you tonight are all on our YouTube channel. So we can share that link again tonight, but you can see all these short clips of where we've tried to share a virtual bus tour of farms in Australia, all on our dedicated YouTube channel. Some very brief images of some recent initiatives I wanted to finish on to share with you. Over the last year or two, we've worked with our National Farmers Federation to really establish a new roadmap or blueprint for the Australian agricultural industry. So working at that national stage, the National Farmers Federation has a plan to shift our agricultural industry from a $60 billion industry to a $100 billion industry by 2030. And we're working together with our industry colleagues in Australia across all industries to see how we can build our entire industry to that level. Paul has mentioned the importance of Smart Cane BNP. The industry has tried very hard and been very successful through the leadership of farmers to, within 5 years, move to over 35% of the industry now accredited to this standard. Our strategy on Smart Cane BNP is to demonstrate to the community and to government that farmers are best placed to manage environmental risk, and to be transparent about that, and to be open and willing to do all they can reasonably do to manage the risks to the Great Barrier Reef. It is a huge opportunity, but as Owen may talk about, our farmers all have the Great Barrier Reef as their next door neighbour. So they all want to do their bit to look after the reef. While Smart Cane BNP started as a way to manage the expectations of government, over recent years we have moved rapidly to seek market recognition. And we would see that this is the future of these accreditation programs. So we've led a program to benchmark Smart Cane BNP across what is a range of very broad and diverse accreditation programs across the world, Bonsucro probably being the largest. So we have mapped our program against each of these programs to ensure that a farmer in Australia, if they choose another path, they know exactly what the difference between our program is and these other ones. And now we are seeking recognition from the buyers of sugar that our program meets their sustainability credentials. To do that, over the last 2 years, we've been leading a project to utilise blockchain technology to establish a certified sustainable supply chain. This is a very, very complex screen, but it is a map of the Australian sugar supply chain. We have mapped the supply chain to identify where the data points of importance are within our supply chain, to a level now where we have developed a prototype based on blockchain to put us in a position to offer sustainability certificates. 2, where if a buyer wants to have certified sustainable sugar, they can come to the Australian industry and have that certification validated via blockchain. We have established the prototype, we have mapped the supply chain, and now we are moving towards a commercial reality for that sustainable supply chain venture. Literally, as Paul has mentioned tonight, to move from BMP to be about regulation to BMP to be about market recognition. And that is imperative for the survival of our industry. A few other initiatives to finish. As I said, it's important for farmers in Australia to become more profitable. So we have also moved to assist farmers to understand the market. We have established a market information service in Australia for our farmers to understand the market drivers and what positions a sugar price across the world. And we've also provided tools for them to determine their costs of production so that they can take advantage of forward pricing opportunities. So we now provide training for farmers to understand their cost of production and then take advantage of market when the market provides an opportunity for them. And finally, we are working as an industry with our colleagues in research, in milling, and in other grower organisations to establish a new vision for the industry, a vision that will still rely on sugar, but also be open for opportunities. And that will have us work together around increasing the volume of cane produced in Australia, increase the overall value of our industry, and to also work together under one voice as an industry. It's important we work as an industry in Australia to stand out in the market, because having open markets to us is important to build our profitability. I'll finish now with just a very brief mention of our challenges. I suspect they're very similar to many of you. We are finding an increasing challenge to continue to communicate and engage with farmers in the way that they want to be communicated with. It's now ever more important that where once farmers would come to lots and lots of meetings, we need to provide communication to them, mostly on their phone or online, in video conferencing, in traditional media, on radio, or all of the above. We have to be flexible and we have to provide communication to them. Most importantly, our work is all targeted towards either reducing input costs or increasing profitability through revenue streams, and that's market access. So profitability and engagement are still our most important functions. And to solve those problems, it is our view that we need to do more to invest in our people. So we invest in leadership and skills development for our farmers to make them ready for these challenges, because we know that the way we face challenges in the past will be the way we have to face them in the future. And essentially, that's together. Thank you, and I hope this has provided you some information that you can see as relevant to your local industry organisations.
Well,
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you very
Back
much,
to you,
Dan.
Timothy.
Yeah, thank you very much. Not back to me, but back to questions. And I've got first a question from James Northern. James, he's the CEO of the NFU Sugar Board, so it's in UK. And James is asking how many staff is working for cane growers, and what is your annual income? And I would add also, for a grower, how much does it cost to be member of cane growers? And by the way, there is another question from Mauritius, who asked if a miller can be a member of your association, but Dan, you already replied, it's only for growers.
We take some money.
James, a very straightforward question. Thank you. Staff, James, we have around 80 staff across the state. Not all are full-time, so we have lots of project staff and lots of part-time staff, but around 80. Your question about how much does it cost a grower, that is different for a grower depending in which district they are in. So a grower pays to cane growers a levy in cents per tonne produced, and there is a local component where the local district office determines the types of services they wish to provide, and they will set a levy in cents per tonne produced. And then there is a state levy on top of that. As a state, a grower pays 19 cents per tonne, and that's everywhere. At a district, it's different, from very, very low to a bit higher than 19. So it's quite different. In terms of your third question, James, I will choose not to answer how much money we get from growers, but I'm happy to maybe talk to you at a separate time about that question.
Show us the financials.
Thank you very much, Dan. I have another question from Jürgen Winter. Jürgen, he's a grower in Germany, and he asked if there is an insurance scheme in Australia. I think you developed something including inside cane growers. Maybe you can describe us.
Jürgen, thank you for joining us. It's nice to see you. Yes, there is. We have a cane growers insurance business as well within cane growers, where we offer a broker service, we call it, for access to commercial insurance, but we employ brokers to help farmers access insurance. So that's one component, but we also offer crop insurance as an industry organisation. As part of membership, you have your crop insured when you are part of cane growers. I hope that answers your question.
Crop insurance, then.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Another question concerning the blockchain. It's a question from Elizabeth Lacoste in CBay Europe. So Dan, do you plan to use blockchain for other things than only sustainability and traceability? Is there a plan to go further than BMP?
We don't have a plan yet to go further, but certainly we want to establish the blockchain to be open to that. And more than likely, it will be open to the marketers involved about how they want to use the blockchain. That's where we see the advantage, is that it is a way to use the chain in the way that the market might see fit. So we want it to be open to be able to use beyond sustainability, but at the moment, sustainability is the focus.
Okay, thank you very much. And by the way, concerning sustainability, do you plan to make some development of organic sugar in Australia?
There are some organic producers, but a very, very small amount of organic producers, largely because there is basically no market for it. There is some organic cane farmers who do supply for local refined sugar, but it's a very, very small percentage.
Okay, thank you. I think we will maybe stop the question because I see that time is flying. It's already 11:30 in your country. So maybe we can go further with Owen.
Okay, fine.
Well, thank you, Timothy. We have one final video, a very short one, another virtual bus tour.
This is the beautiful Mulgrave Valley south of Cairns. Our virtual bus tour is here to see how innovative cane growers are using recycled waste materials to create compost. That's steam, rising as a compost turner works in the windrows at the Rossi Brothers facility in Aloomba. The steam is a sign that microbes are hard at work.
We start off with this machine. We pump 500 litres of rainwater into it with a mix of molasses added to it. Then we load with the excavator. We load in about 4 buckets of biosolids while product's liquid. It mixes with the water. That gives us about 2 tonne of biosolids. Then we mix a bit of trampoline if we've got it. We collect that with a little forage harvester after we've harvested.
Cane trash, cow manure, sugar mill byproducts, garden mulch, even sorghum sourced from a nearby farm can all be included. It's time for the compost turner to do its job.
Just a big rotor goes opposite to a rotary hose, so it's going into the product and lifting it up instead of turning it in. That allows it to aerate, and the way the blades are, they tend to throw it all to the middle, so it gives you a nice shaped windrow.
It's a promising start and a confidence booster for the Rossi brothers, who are eager to do their bit for the environment in the place that they call home.
It does have a good feeling that you're doing good for your soil, and you're using waste products that have got to go somewhere. The carbon we're putting into the soil is going to be very beneficial.
So, Timothy, finally over to Owen Menkins, who is our Junior Vice Chairman, to talk about his farm and how he manages his farming business. Owen.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I'd just like to acknowledge the past and present people of this land. And with that in mind, I'd just like to say, hello world. There was a very famous radio presenter from Australia called John Laws, who used to start his show every morning by saying, hello world, even though it was probably broadcast to a very small number of Australians. But this tonight is actually hello world. There's 27 different countries here, which is very exciting. And I'd just like to say that this presentation is if it's a farm tour. So I'd just like to welcome you to my farm. So here's the slide. The slide is, yes, a photo of my family. I'm married with 4 children, and that's our cane in the background. Initially, I went to school and then studied Bachelor of Commerce, which I then used to work in accounting in the city. But then I saw the light and realised that I wanted to go back to farming, back where all the fun is. So I left the city and moved back to the farm. One of the main reasons I moved back to the farm is because of the lifestyle. And part of that lifestyle is fishing and diving on the Great Barrier Reef. We're very fortunate in North Queensland to have a fantastic area to fish in and dive in, and it's great for the kids to see. And you can see it there, it's right on the coast. On our place, it's a fair way off the coast, but it's still very, very exciting for us to go to. As far as myself, I started off as a director of my local company, like Dan explained, the Burdekin Company. I've been a director of that company for 13 years. I became a director of Queensland cane growers 8 years ago, and then now I'm vice chairman of Queensland cane growers. I'm also a member of the Cane Growers Policy Council. I find the roles very fulfilling, and I guess more importantly, it's about getting ready for the next generation and keeping our industry vibrant. This next slide shows a map of the Burdekin, and this is where we are. You can see we're part of northern part of Australia on the coast. You can see that dark area in the sea is actually the Great Barrier Reef. It extends from right up the top of Queensland all the way down to near sort of Bundaberg, just about a little over 2,000 kilometres. So therefore, as a grower, we're fairly used to hearing about the reef. On the right-hand side, there's a map of the Burdekin region. The Burdekin region is considered to be part of the dry tropics, in that we are a lot drier than areas to the north of us, which would be called the wet tropics, which are more rainforesty, and to the south of us, where Paul is from, where it's also where it rains a lot more. So the sugarcane is generally rain grown. So therefore, a lot of our cane, all of our cane is irrigated. You can see on the map of the Burdekin there, on the right-hand side of that map, there's an area known as the waterboard area, which is the older area, which is traditionally grown, is towards the coast. It's traditionally grown using underground water. The area to the left of that Burdekin map is the newer opened up area, and it's part of the Burdekin River irrigation area. That area is generally irrigated via a channel system, which is fed down the river from the Burdekin Dam. The Burdekin Dam is one of the largest dams in Australia. It has a capacity of 1.8 million megalitres, and it yields a little over 700,000 megalitres irrigation. My farm is in the waterboard area, in the more older area of the district, and the waterboard area is basically irrigated through the aquifer. The aquifer is a vast amount of underground water, which is managed through a system which has been developed over many years, whereby it is the water that is pumped out is then replenished through a system of channels and deep drainage pits. This system is managed by growers and millers and the council, as well as being part of a state government system. The benefit of having a management system allows the water to maintain a certain level. It also stops the salt from intruding from the ocean. This third slide is a picture of the Burdekin River and the Burdekin Bridge. And you can also see on the edge of that slide, that picture is a picture of Inkerman Mill. And in the background is the town of Home Hill, which is where I'm from. The Burdekin is Australia's most productive sugarcane region. We produce about 8 million tonnes of sugarcane each year, and with that is about 1.2 million tonnes of sugar annually. There are 4 sugar mills in the Burdekin. There's 3 on the North Bank and 1 on the South Bank, and they are all owned by Wilmar. In the Burdekin, on average, we receive 650 mils of rainfall. Unfortunately, it usually only falls within 2 months of the year, so we have a very wet season and then mostly dry for the rest of the year. We do have, on average, 300 days of sunshine. The good thing about this is it does allow us to grow, with our virtually unlimited water, allow us to grow very heavy sugarcane crops. On average, our sugarcane crops yield 120 tonnes per hectare, of cane and about 18 tonnes per hectare of sugar. The crops yield high amounts, but they take a lot of input costs to grow. So we have very high fertiliser, electricity and water costs compared to other districts. We also grow other crops in the Burdekin. There are crops grown in fallow, which include mung bean, soybean and peanuts. There are also crops grown in tandem with sugarcane in an 18-month fallow. So you get crops like corn, sorghum, rice. There's also a fairly large horticultural industry, and there's also a large beef industry around, and so there's a lot of grains grown for the cattle industry as well. Next slide. This next slide is a bit about my farm. My great-grandfather purchased my home farm in 1926. I'm therefore the fourth generation. That aerial photo there is our home farm with my house on the left. Today we've grown that farm from 57 hectares in 1926 to now we grow 340 hectares. Our average crop is around 36,000 tonne of cane and also about 5,200 tonne of sugar produced annually. We normally grow our crops to fourth ratoon and then fallow for 6 months. So usually we have about 15% fallow ground each year. We do try to grow mung green or other bean crops in fallow for harvest, but sometimes because of the rain, we don't have a very consistent harvest. Generally, we're fully furrow irrigation, and we get most of that from the underground water, which brings us to the next slide, which is irrigation. So this slide has a picture on the left of two separate pumps that I have on my farm. There's one which is a turbine pump, which you can see the motor on the top. So that motor drives a pump that is about 25 metres under the ground, and that pump pumps the water through a spear, which then goes up through that pipe and then goes down into that other pipeline. The pump beside it is a submersible pump, so it's a pump that has got the motor and the pump 25 metres under the ground inside a spear. That pump there pumps straight back into the pipeline as well. And so once it goes into the pipeline, the water then runs through an outlet and then into the gravity fed into the paddock. And then once at the paddock, it runs through a thing we call plastic fluming, and then through that it goes down those furrows to irrigate the cane. That photo on the right was taken on Friday. So at the moment we're irrigating some fairly young plant cane. The fluming, the black plastic fluming that you see there was actually developed by my father in the 1960s. He was the first one to successfully get it to work. Unfortunately, he didn't keep the rights to that fluming. So yeah, anyway, he's got his name on it, but that's about it. We don't get any money, even though it's used right across the Burdekin now. So the next slide is the harvest. In the Burdekin, because of our heavier crops and because of our furrow irrigation, we generally burn nearly all of our crops. So the photo on the left is a normal thing that happens pretty much every night of the harvest in the Burdekin. It's a sugarcane fire. You'll see that we have a brake pushed by a machine called a brake pusher, which parts the cane down the drill so that it is separated from either side, and then one side is lit so that that side burns. And you can see right at the back of that picture is a tractor, which is a water tractor, which follows along the fire and puts it out in case it jumps onto the left-hand side, which is the bit we don't want to burn. usually you work in a way that works well with the wind. So generally the wind is fairly consistent in our area. So usually you don't have too many problems, and you generally try and burn at night or very early in the morning. That photo was taken, I just walked out of the paddock and walked around the corner with the burner and then took the photo, and it was about 4 o'clock in the morning, which is generally a good time to burn because there's not much wind. After the cane is burnt, it's then harvested, and you can see that the only issue with burning cane is you have a limited period with which to get that harvested cane to the mill. So usually during the winter period, you can have up to 2 weeks, but generally you try and get it to the mill within 2 or 3 days. So the cane is then harvested and sent into those trucks, which then deliver it to a siding, which is a cane train siding, where these bins on the back of those trucks are then carted to the mill. We are probably the only area that still burns cane, mainly because of, like I said before, because of the furrows you see where the truck's wheels are. We have to irrigate down those furrows, and because of the high volume of trash that the crops have, it makes it very inefficient to irrigate with the trash still in the drills. We are looking in our local area, we're looking at trash separation techniques and ways of capturing the trash for our own use and to use it in other forms. It's still a work in progress. There are some areas in New South Wales, they tried a separation technique and it didn't quite go to plan, but we're certainly on the lookout for it. This next slide is about the environment. So as been mentioned by Paul and Dan, the first symbol there is the BMP symbol. That other photo there is a photo of my recycle pit. Essentially what that big grassy drain is when the irrigation water runs out of the block, it runs down a couple of drains and then ends up in this pit. And then that little pump there pumps the water out of that drain and goes back into the main pipeline and then back down the furrow again. So that's why it is called a recycle pit, because essentially the irrigation water is recycled. So I'm a voluntary Smart Cane BMP accredited grower. Mainly, I've been accredited for 5 years, so I'll be up for my re-accreditation shortly too. The BMP accreditation system essentially it involves recording all your fertiliser, herbicide, cultivation and water use. So it is to keep it at a level that is sustainable and environmentally sustainable, and also productive. I use the required rates of N, P, K and S based on soil tests done on every fallow block. The BMP was initially brought in to combat the environmental laws, but from what I can see now, I can see that it'll be something that we can use in the future for a sustainable sugar, as Dan pointed out with our blockchain technology. We were fortunate in our area. Wilmar did pay growers 15 cents a tonne if they got accredited, but that wasn't to do with BMP, it was more to do with government regulation with regard to their ethanol business. So even though we did get a small payment from our millers to get accredited. The growers that aren't BMP accredited at the moment, they will get audited by the state government auditors who can legally access their personal documents to make sure they are following the legislation. The state government reef regulations are very onerous on growers, as they can be fined up to $232,000 Australian or $200,000 US for non-compliance. With regard to my irrigation, all of my irrigation water generally soaks back into the underground in the aquifer. So that aquifer that I was describing before, most of my water flows back, and the bits that don't flow into recycle pits like that. The aquifer itself is essentially a huge underground stream that can be best described as being a massive riverbank. And in that riverbank, there's little streams of deep water and shallower water. And the better drift in that underground is in the deeper water, and the shallower drift is in the shallower water. Sorry. The next slide is the interesting bit, how I get paid. Once the harvested cane that you see there is sent to the mill, it is weighed, measured, and the CCS, or the sugar content, is measured. Then through that, the diagram on the right shows you a breakdown of our cane payment formula. Now, the cane payment formula was developed well over 100 years ago and is a fairly complex instrument, but the best way to describe it is basically it shares the sugar production between the grower and the miller. So you can see the CCS units there. Basically, the mill gets the first 4 units of CCS, and the growers get the rest. So if the CCS level is around 12, it works out about 2/3, 1/3. But if the CCS level gets higher, the grower gets a higher percentage. But that also gets changed due to factors with regard to mill recovery. So that if the mill recovery is better, there's a better percentage for the mill. So the system is fairly complex, but that's sort of basically what it is. It more or less works out about 2/3, 1/3. So once that amount of sugar that is worked out at the mill I am allocated an amount of sugar, and this is based on that formula. Once I have this amount of sugar, I am able to choose the marketer that I wish to market that sugar with. Usually this is done well before the harvest. So once the sugar is delivered by the miller to the sugar storage, at this point the marketer purchases my sugar from the mill and takes ownership of it. I am then paid directly by the marketer for my sugar. Usually they pay us 65% of my estimated total pricing at the delivery of the sugar, and then the rest is paid throughout the year in instalments. It has been paid in instalments for a long time, basically for 2 reasons. One, to make it easier for growers to manage their costs, so they get a monthly payment to deal with throughout the year. Also, it reflects when the sugar gets sold. So the marketer will sell that sugar around the world, and they may ship it out straight away, or they may hang on to it throughout the entire year. So therefore, it works for the marketer to have the ability to pay that sugar right through the year rather than paying it all in one go. So this slide here is a diagram of our forward pricing. We get a forward pricing email or text that we get from our sugar marketer, or my sugar marketer's QSL. We get that every day. Also, we get, they also have an app, and you can see it on my phone that is just there that I can access every day to help. I can check the price, and I can also make pricing confirmations or pricing orders. So essentially that diagram essentially shows at the top the spot US cents a pound price. Then below that it's got the US Australian dollar conversion rate. And so from that, they get the price for the sugar in Australian dollars. So the top price there for the 2021, 2 and 3 and 4, that is the average over the 4 individual futures contracts for the year. So you can see the 2021 price was $502. That's the average price. Then there's that is averaged over those 4 contracts. So then growers can choose to either pick a average price in a future year, or they can price on those individual contracts in the current year. So for at the moment, it's actually a backward-facing market. So there's not too many people forward pricing out to 2023, 24 because the price is lower. But in a lot of years, you have a higher price further out. So you can go in and set a target of, say, $500, and you put it in for 2023. And then once you've got your contract with the mill, you have a on-supply agreement contract with your marketer, you can then go and price that sugar. And then once you have your target price, then that if the market hits that night, that marketer puts that price away for you for the future year. So I can do that for up to 70% of my crop in the previous year of harvest. So I can theoretically harvest 70% of my 2022 crop in this financial year, this 2021 year. And in the actual year of harvest, so for the 2021 harvest, I can actually price up to 100% of my crop, and I can price that during the season. So that's where you use the July, October, March and May contracts. If you do not wish to price the crop further out, you don't have to. You can just leave it and it'll go into a pool, which is the marketer's pool, which is known as the crop production or harvest pool. That basically pools all the growers' sugar, and then the marketer then prices that as they receive the sugar during the year. So for the 2021 year, they would have priced a little bit, but not very much. But as the sugar goes into the shed, they will continue to price it right through the year until May 2022. So for growers who are worried about risk, they can put their crop purely into the managed pool and essentially just go with what the price is or what the price is at the time. Or if they're more concerned about actually picking a price, most of the marketers have their own pools, which involve them pricing that sugar a couple of years out in their own pools. So, and there's also some districts where growers have got together and formed their own pricing groups where they price all the growers' sugar in that pool together. So there's a lot of different options throughout the state with regard to how people price, and different milling companies and different marketers have different options. QSL is the industry-owned marketing body, which is available to all growers in the state to choose to market their sugar. The big advantage about forward pricing is that it gives me certainty about my future income. It also gives the bank certainty because they're the ones who are paying for it all. It also gives the mill certainty because you can't price anything in the future unless you have a CSA, which is a cane supply agreement with a mill extending out 2, 3 or sometimes 4 years. Once you sign that agreement, you have to supply that mill with cane. You also have to supply that marketer with sugar. So you have commitments. So getting the price does come with it a commitment. And that's fine because we're we're used to growing cane, so that's not a real problem. But there's also always risk of weather and crop downfalls. So that's why you generally try not to price more than 70% prior to the harvest year, because then you'll know whether you'll get a weather event or whether you'll have issues with actually getting the crop off. I guess that's probably all I have to say, and I guess I can just pass over to questions.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much, Owen. It won't take a lot of time because I think it's already midnight in your country. Just one question from Carlos Blacala. He's the president of the cane growers in Mexico. And he's asking if, when you mention a yield, and for instance, when you mention also a CCS, do you include only sucrose, or is it including a sugar that is at the end in the molasses?
No, it's only the sugar, the sugar taken from the first mill. So it's only the juice from the first milling train. So it's only sugar, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question also, can you use GMOs in Australia? For instance, we know that there have been some development of sugarcane GMOs in Brazil. Can you use it in Australia?
No, there's no GM.
Not at this point.
Not at this point. There's been work on GM canes, but they're not, due to market issues, they're not viable for us to produce at the moment.
Okay, it's not because of technical issues, it's market issues. All right.
Market issues.
All right. Then there were some other questions, but I think Dan already replied in the chat box. And I think we can just one other question from Elizabeth Lacoste in CB. When you mentioned that by the past QSL was the only marketer, and now there is some new marketers, how many of them in Australia? As many as mills, or?
Yes. Yeah, the mills, the milling companies generally market to their growers in that area that they mill. So Wilmar has a marketing company, Mackay Sugar has a marketing company, Kofco have a marketing company, and Midpol has a marketing company. And then, yeah, QSL is the only one that goes across mills. So growers can't market with Mackay if you're in a Wilmar area. You only have a choice of two. You either have Wilmar or you have QSL.
All right. And it includes marketing for their own company, for their own transfer, which is difficult to follow. Okay, I think we will have to stop now because it's already 2 hours. It was very interesting. Maybe I suggest Eduardo Romao. Do you want to say a few words before to give the floor to Paul once again?
Yes, just I'd like to say thank you very much for Paul, Dan, and all the sugarcane growers from Australia. It's just a marvelous explanation. Yeah, it was a very good presentation. Thank you very much for hosting this meeting. It's a very important one from a very important sugarcane country. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you, Eduardo. It's 2 minutes to midnight and I want to finish before midnight. So simply want to thank you all for joining us tonight. And I hope you've gained an insight into our industry. As I said in my opening remarks, a wonderful aspect of WABCG is that we can share the experience of what's happening in every industry. And I hope some of what you have learned about our industry is helpful to you. Last comment I want to make, it's so great to see so many of you on the screen because with the pandemic, unfortunately, we've not been able to catch up. So it's my great wish that as soon as possible, we can catch up and see so many of you. So signing off just right before midnight. Thank you all.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you very much, Paul. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
And see you next week.
Thank you to all the Australian cane growers.
See you next Monday.